Thank you everyone for joining our first webinar on the State of Industrial DevOps report. Really excited to dive in. We're going to get started in a couple minutes. So in the meantime, just want to learn what people are interested in today and interesting to learn. So here's a poll if you don't mind answering. Will just help us understand a little bit of who's joining us today. We should get started about 3 after the hour, so in about 2 minutes. Thank you. Hey there, everyone. See some more people joining. Just a reminder, we're going to get started about 3 after the hour, so in about 60 seconds. In the meantime, if you'd like to answer a poll for what you're hoping to learn from today's webinar, that'd be great. Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to our speaker today, Jerry Abbey. Jerry is the Director of Product Marketing at Copia. Without further ado, I'm going to close the poll and share the results so Jerry can sort of see that. And then I'm going to pass it off to you, Jerry.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe. And thanks for setting up that poll. Looks like we've got a great group together, and the responses here align perfectly with what we're going to present today. As Joe said, I'm Jerry Abbey. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Copia. And I'm just going to, are we able to share the results with the audience, Joe, or do I need to read through that?
Yeah, when I shared them, they saw that. So I think everyone was able to see.
Right. Perfect. So we're looking for information on what industrial DevOps is, followed by the practical steps to mitigate downtime and increase productivity, causes of downtime, and that's all going to come out in this presentation today. All right. So as I said, I'm Jerry Abbey, Director of Product Marketing here at Copia. My background in the lower left here, I worked for Rockwell Automation, Plex Systems. You may be familiar with those if you're in and around the industry. And then I've jumped around to a couple other different professions over the last 20 years. It actually has really helped as I dig into manufacturing and distribution, having worked in plumbing and heating, and often wondered what it took to make many of the products that I was working with as I was soldering and gluing pipes together all over creation in Philadelphia. Additionally, over the last 15 years, I've been a marketer for software and really doing a lot of data research over that time. In the upper right, you can see the report that we're talking about today, but also the State of Smart Manufacturing report, which is a flagship report that Rockwell puts out every year. And I was the lead on that for the last 3 years before coming to Copia. I am based in Rhode Island, and I've also spent time in Taiwan and Spain. Went to BU, Fairfield, written a couple books, and am a diehard Philadelphia fan for all sports, which may come out in my presentations. All right, diving in here to share some of the background on this report, the State of Industrial DevOps. We surveyed 200 executives in the US and partnered with a third-party research firm that I've worked with for the last 3 or 4 years to get that unbiased third-party data. They surveyed these 200 executives, 42% of which had C-suite titles. Another 38% were director to SVP, and 20% were managers. Looking at the size of companies that we surveyed, 58% were over $1 billion in revenue. Then you can see here in industry, the top industries that we looked at were high tech, electronics and semiconductor, retail, automotive. We also surveyed food and beverage, metals, metal fabricating, and several others that's spilled in there. All right, so as we dive in, industrial DevOps is the application of lean, agile, and DevOps principles to the planning, development, manufacturing, deployment, and serviceability of significant cyber physical systems. That's a lot to take in, and on the following slides, we're going to dig in a little deeper to what that actually means. Oh. 1 second, I'm going to pause sharing my screen because some of my slides did not show up. Quick pause here. I added a few slides before we started. All right, I think I've got it corrected. I will come right back up here. All right, so for the executive summary, this is the data that we're going to be digging into today after I dig a little deeper on exactly what industrial DevOps is and means today. So in the report, we found a few key themes. 1, preventable downtime. 2, cybersecure practices. And 3, competitive advantage. In the preventable downtime, we found that there's a huge cost to downtime based on the 200 executive responses that we got for this survey. 67% of our respondents said that an hour of downtime costs $1 million. 36% said it's greater than $5 million per hour. Again, I want to reiterate that 58% of this survey was coming from organizations with over $1 billion in revenue. That said, these are still significant numbers, and 50% of downtime was said to be attributed to industrial code management. And that number increased by the size of the organization. In the middle column here, we had a lot of feedback around cybersecurity and cybersecure practices, which industrial DevOps can help with. 47% of unintended downtime is said to be caused by a cybersecurity breach. That was the #1 response when asked about unintended downtime. One of the things that we think is contributing to this, 78% of our survey respondents said that ad hoc fixes, hot fixes on the plant floor are commonplace. And we believe that the prevalence of those is from the pressure from those very high downtime costs per hour, needing to get systems moving as fast as humanly possible so that margins are not decreased by the downtime impacting the organization. The last key point right here is that 41% of OT decisions involve cybersecurity or security stakeholders. Having run surveys and research reports like this over the last several years, this number is increasing, and that's a really positive thing to see. And I think will help make it easier as we move towards adopting industrial DevOps across manufacturing and distribution. In the last column here, and we're going to dig into this more later, is we see a distinct competitive advantage coming from this approach. The responses were that 97% of the survey agreed that their team would benefit from industrial DevOps. They identified that 45 hours per week are spent on debugging code, and that if you can implement this type of process and teamwork, you can reduce those debugging hours. And what's more, and really stood out to me as I was digging into the data, 10% of our respondents said that they have no obstacles whatsoever to moving forward with DevOps and already are moving forward with industrial DevOps. And that's significant when you think of that first mover advantage. All right. Now we're going to move into the history, context, and definition of industrial DevOps. All right, so in the report, and what we're looking at is a copy of much of what you'll see in the report. We put in a timeline to help level set on where industrial DevOps came from. So DevOps, which is practices that are incorporated within industrial DevOps, was born around late 2008, 2009, mainly from conferences, researchers beginning to talk about it, and DevOps kind of grew out of other methodologies like Scrum, like Agile. If you look to one of our 2013 stats, the Phoenix project, that actually took inspiration from manufacturing. It looked at lean production versus mass production, and it looked at Eli Goldratt's book, The Goal, and took these advantages, these systems and processes in place in manufacturing, and thought about how to apply them to software engineering to figure out a better way, a better system to advance the business. And that, the way it was laid out, the establishment of the State of DevOps report, it really caught fire. So much so that Gartner in 2016 predicted mainstream adoption of DevOps, and Forrester called 2017 the year of DevOps. Moving forward, Copia founder Adam Gluck had been working for Uber as a founding member of the engineering team, the engineering driver team, and started researching, looking into where DevOps is being used, where it could be used to help other processes, and started digging into manufacturing to looking at how code was being organized in manufacturing and what differences there were when you're looking at cyber physical systems. And that's software mixed with hardware. You have all these machines running production, and now as organizations work through their digital transformation, there is more and more code proliferating across the plant floor. In 2023, we had the book Industrial DevOps, Build Better Systems Faster, written by Dr. Suzette Johnson and Robin Yeaman. Dr. Suzette Johnson has worked for Northrop Grumman for years and years and dug deep into this research, along with Robin Yeaman, who worked for Lockheed for years and years, and had this experience and were able to interview and work on site to see this fusion of cyber physical systems. And that research has really helped to explain what industrial DevOps is, what advantages it brings to manufacturing and distribution, and where it can be leveraged in an optimal way. And then to this year, we're starting to see industry analysts begin to write about industrial DevOps as an opportunity in industrial automation. Frost & Sullivan named it a top 15 growth opportunity, and we undertook this report to begin a benchmark of peer data to understand where the industry is today. So I talked about the founding of Copia, talked about this great book, Industrial DevOps. I highly recommend you read it if you would like to learn more and see a lot of concrete examples about how industrial DevOps formed through the fusion of DevOps practices, Agile and Lean methodologies, and Scrum and others pulled in. Recently, it was a winner of the Ben Franklin Silver Medal Award and the 2023 DevOps Dozen Award. Really great read. This is part of the research I mentioned coming out of Frost and Sullivan, looking at those growth opportunities. While it's ranked at 14th today, this is an early stage where people are beginning to publicly recognize the importance of industrial DevOps. The business cases are being made, and we have data around the impact and how it can help build that competitive advantage. Influencers on LinkedIn are talking about it. Jeff Winter, who we worked with on this report, is a good friend. I've worked with him on past reports, really helping to get it out for people to begin thinking about what it would look like in their operations and their digital journey to bring in industrial DevOps. This is more from the report. I'm not going to read through it, but you can take a look at the report after this presentation. So I have a few visual examples before we dive in deep into the data to think about where industrial DevOps fits and how it fits. And this first one is more of that simple structure you've probably seen before in other diagrams, but it really puts people at the center. In manufacturing and distribution, in pretty much every field right now, there's a workforce shortage and there's a skills gap. And if you put people at the center, it's a great first step to moving away from having a workforce issue and amplifying the impact of the people you do have and empowering them to look at process within everything you're doing and think about, is this the right process before we move towards automation? Is this a process that empowers our people to do their best work? Is there a way to refine this process? To do that deep dive before any step towards automation is vital and really helps your people get on board with making that automation work, understanding how it impacts their job, how it impacts up-leveling their role potentially, and training them to be able to add more value to the business and more in a more engaging role. And then the third step here, looking at continuous improvement. We always want to improve what we're doing. And if you're able to build that process, move into the automation, and then get together as a group and look at ways for continuous improvement, this is the baseline of industrial DevOps. To bring your people together, remove blockers, have a single source of truth to work from, and have stand-up meetings, maybe weekly, daily, monthly, maybe bi-weekly, but on a consistent basis, so that you can bring people together and talk about what can improve a process and iterate on that so that you can keep this virtuous cycle going to improve operations. This is a deeper dive into where industrial DevOps fits in your digital transformation journey, your industrial transformation. On the left hand, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have some degree of automation running today. You have these pieces of smart manufacturing, and on the left side, just listed a few for examples, looking at that cyber, the software examples, and the physical, your hardware examples. Coming out of those, you have data and industrial code. Lots and lots of data. In this age of artificial intelligence, machine learning, everybody looking to harness that next phase of technology, it's really important to make sure that that data is checked and understood, and intelligent data that you can base an AI model on, make decisions on, move your business forward on. And it's important to make sure that you have a plan for all of the industrial code that's going into your operations, that you have a way to back it up in the event of a worst case where you have an instance that you need disaster recovery. Last fall, Toyota had a system update, shut down 14 factories for 10 hours, which calculated out to a cost of $356 million to the organization for that one instance of downtime. That's a huge impact. And thinking about that, and regardless of the size of your organization, any downtime incident is going to impact your margins, and you want to avoid it. And taking care of your industrial code with this industrial DevOps approach can help mitigate it. Looking at the center column, you see industrial DevOps. It really drives collaboration and process improvement. I was working on a case study this morning, talking to some customers, and they really hammered home the importance of version control, talking about using hundreds of different versions saved in an unorganized fashion, just depending who was working on it, just saved it as an unclear next version. And it's really almost impossible to understand what is the latest version of your PLC code or your robotics code or your camera code. And having this single source of truth in place using an industrial DevOps platform that's multi-vendor and can plug into your multiple different types of devices helps bring everyone together, helps unify that backup so you're backing up the latest and greatest of the code, and allows people to collaborate. In that way, you can monitor, you can log updates, you have continuous delivery and automated testing, automated backup, these best-in-class approaches to managing your industrial code to ensure that everything is running smoothly. On the right column there in that middle, it's also helping to enforce cybersecurity practices. You're able to have visibility into what compliance standards you need to meet. You have tracking, you have rigor, you understand who is changing code and when. You have secure access. You begin to build that transparency for bringing AI and ML in, because you have a clean way to look at code and build that baseline of data that is checked and understood where it's coming from and how it will impact your operations when you feed it into a model. On the right side, again, going back to people in action and rounding out this picture of where industrial DevOps fits, you have a culture of change to help drive this forward, and thinking about change management, pulling together and championing change, communicating often, training continuously, and getting people on board, especially embracing your detractors. And if you are a detractor, embracing someone that will come into the fold and talk with counterpoints and allowing them to do so if you are a lead decision maker, so you can have a well-rounded approach to this digital transformation next step or industrial DevOps adoption. All right, digging into the data. So one of the most impactful things that we saw from the survey, and I mentioned earlier, is seeing 4.2 million per hour as the average for this survey in downtime. It's a huge number, and we dug in very deep, testing this throughout our organization, testing it with industry analysts, testing it with experts in the field, including Dr. Johnson, Robin Yemen, Jeff Winter, and even crossing into DevOps field, pulling in one of the leads for Google's DORA DevOps report, Nathan Harvey, and got feedback from everyone and looked at the data in as many ways as we possibly could. So we looked at it by revenue band, and looking by revenue band, we saw an increase from the lowest revenue that we surveyed to the highest. The numbers per hour went up for each one. And then we looked at tech budget. What are people, how much people are investing in the OT space? Maybe that could be different. But for each band, the more they spent investing, the higher it went. And then lastly, looking at the number of PLCs and thinking about the different amount of devices on the floor, as you increased on those, you increased on the amount here. Then we looked at multiple different industry reports. There are a lot of reports out there, a lot of quotes out there about downtime per hour. The one that I've seen the most is in reference to automotive. Automotive is always costly. I gave that Toyota example earlier, and probably the most quoted. But here we looked at the true cost of downtime 2022, Sensei's predictive maintenance survey. We looked at the average cost of downtime in the auto industry, the Pingdom team. We looked at the value of reliability in ABB survey, and that one actually came in the lowest, but the organizations that were surveyed, 75% of them were 10 million in revenue or under. So looking out at all the different stats out there, also we looked at Aberdeen Research's reports from 2014 and 2016, and Gartner, the few numbers that are out there, most prominently 540,000 per hour for downtime. Lots of numbers out there, lots of impact to your business because of downtime, but we did as much due diligence as possible to really understand this. And regardless of your business size, it is a huge impact to experience downtime. We looked deeper here and found that Toyota example, Clorox example, and just in general, the top 500 global industrial companies alone are losing north of 1.5 trillion annually. What does this impact have on operations? When we look at this, in the survey, we asked two different ways. So we wanted to understand for all of downtime, planned and unplanned, how much of that is influenced by industrial code, and we got 50%. And as I said earlier, when you look at bigger organizations, you can see there it increased to over 60% of downtime that's planned and unplanned attributed to industrial code. On the right side of the screen here, we can see the most common causes of unplanned downtime. I mentioned earlier the cybersecurity breach as number one. Right behind it, hardware malfunction, coding software issues, human error, and environmental disaster. A lot of these can all stem back to coding and software issues and human error. When thinking about cybersecurity breaches, if you have somebody updating code, or one example I heard recently, using a cell network to bypass the in-house network so that they could set up a new piece of hardware and move things along faster, that opens up security breach and goes back to how you are managing your industrial code and software, not having a process that prevents that in place. Hardware malfunctions, we've heard from numerous customers where a third shift employee is under pressure because they need to make the line move faster. They change the code and there is no way to visually track that. It makes the machine run faster, the machine breaks down, it gets credited as a hardware malfunction. There are so many things that can stem back to how you are managing your coding and software, and also how you're managing your people, which is another huge part of this. It's not just having a technology in place, it's having a technology that also reinforces the right culture to help your organization produce best results. In the data that we got back, we can see some things that are a bit of a disconnect and broken in the process. We found that 99% of respondents have a code review process. 81% of respondents, though, only spend 4 hours or less a month reviewing code. While 4 hours might be enough for some organizations, when you compare it to the average in the survey of 45 hours per month spent on debugging code, it's unbalanced. And when we dug deeper at this data, while that's 10 times more than the amount of reviewing code, it spikes for retail and material handling, almost 20 times with 77 hours per month spent on debugging code versus 4 hours reviewing code and making sure that it's right. Another impact of downtime, looking at ad hoc fixes. So I mentioned that earlier, and you can see that 78% of the survey said that they are very or somewhat common. We also see that in total, average time spent completely resolving a downtime event takes 31 hours. And we dug deep on this stat, thinking about postmortems, what happens. You might be able to get a downtime event resolved in a couple hours, but there's also the follow-up that comes after it, equaling that 31. All right, and then looking at a cascade effect that comes from those ad hoc fixes, we surveyed large organizations, 58% again, over $1 billion, and 14% of those organizations have over 10,000 devices, 42% over 2,000, 75% over 600 devices. When you're doing these hot fixes on the floor to avoid downtime or get backup from downtime, it can happen fast, it's not tracked, and it can cascade across the organization where one device can impact another, and then you experience another downtime event just over and over. The proliferation without that set system in place, an industrial DevOps type approach to help organize that, track it, and move towards that best in class. On the right-hand side, you can see the breakdown of different devices. We found the average number of different PLC brands in use was 5.5, which again can make it really difficult to track your industrial code because you're operating in proprietary systems versus the industrial DevOps platform approach where you can pull in and work in one place and have that single source of truth. Also, the associated devices. It was a very long list. We show 9 of the most popular ones right here, but so many different devices that are dealing with code and trying to manage an update for cybersecurity. All those different devices can be a challenge. Lastly, one thing that we're going to dig in deeper next year on is, our organization spending enough on operational technology? Based on the data from this report, just looking at annual revenue versus annual budget for OT, industrial automation, IoT, connected machines, PLC software and hardware, and related investment, it looks like possibly not. In that middle column, you can see percent invested as a percentage of revenue. And while you get economy of scale as you grow as an organization, when you look at those bottom numbers, it looks like perhaps there's an underinvestment here. In the OT space, traditionally it has been set it and forget it. You have the DMZ layer in the Purdue model, creating that disconnect from the public network so that your organization is protected. But we're seeing more and more instances of shadow OT, like that cell network I mentioned earlier, and USB sticks being plugged in, devices being added without approval. It can really cascade quickly to make your organization vulnerable if you don't have visibility into how everything is being managed. That convergence of IT/OT continues to happen. Now, lastly, looking at, we talked through a lot of this, but a need for industrial DevOps. The sentiment was strong from the survey, and all the different technologies and tools that our respondents looked at are highlighted here on the right. AI-powered machine learning for predictive maintenance and industrial IoT integration. If you look in the middle there, you can see advanced GitOps workflows for OT and PLC code management, which gives a best-in-class way to manage that code. We're seeing a huge impact from the responses on how industrial DevOps can help the workforce. In the responses asking where industrial DevOps teams focus their time, we see that they spend 2 times more on learning and adopting new technologies versus unplanned work and rework. going back to that stat about debugging and thinking about proactively adding value to the business, being able to move things forward. Again, going back to the case study conversation I had this morning, our customer talked about the way previously he would have to follow up on any issues with PLC coding. And now, because they have a single source of truth and are able to do a best-in-class management of their industrial code, it's not all on him, but can be distributed across the team, leaving him to not be interrupted by fire drills and rather to focus on his area, his specialty within the business. It makes a huge difference and has a huge impact on the quality of that worker's life at work. Now, looking again at cybersecurity a little deeper here, we asked how industrial code, PLC programming software helps mitigate cybersecurity risks. And on the right side here, you can see these top examples. Compliance with cybersecurity standards. We're seeing more and more standards be implemented, and having the ability to know that you are in compliance with them, have visibility and control into that, can make a world of difference. Knowing that your data integrity is there, especially as you introduce AI and ML, secure coding guidelines, vulnerability scanning, knowing who is changing code and when, and having that tracked so that you can go back and even revert the code in an instance like Toyota's downtime last year. If a system update crashes something, to just click a button and go back in time can make a world of difference to your organization and prevent that costly downtime that goes on. Now, going forward, we asked, what's preventing people from moving forward with this DevOps-oriented industrial DevOps approach? And similar to what you see in other technology advances, it's competing priorities. What is the right place to spend money on to have a maximum impact on the business today? Lack of interest from management and decision makers, not seeing a necessary problem. Things are working. How many people in this audience hear that? Things are working. This other area needs investment because things are not working. We're going to put the money there. We see that many of the respondents didn't have a need for urgency because they say their approach to industrial code positively impacts competitiveness. Now, I've been doing surveys and market research for 15 years, and it's near impossible to get 91% or over 90% on any response. And say 91% see their current approach as a competitive advantage. One, it's statistically impossible, and two, I think there's a lot of knowledge sharing that needs to happen to understand what a better way could look like. 59% of the survey said their current approach to version control and configuration management is easy. Is it really easy? Again, going back to, could there be a better way? When you think about just the PLCs and the responses in this survey saying their organization has on average 5.5 different brands of PLC, and they're managing their version control and configuration management in proprietary systems, 5.5 different systems, that seems not easy. So it's looking at this data, thinking about what good could really look like and what comes next. And again, I just wanted to share this picture now that we've talked through the data, where industrial DevOps fits in. It's bringing together your technology and your automation, both the cyber and physical, having a platform that can help connect this together, having the process in place to empower your people, and empowering your people with change management and building a culture of change. There's so many conversations out there about the workforce today, and one of the best ways to resolve workforce issues is empowering your people and giving them something meaningful to work on. this is the end of the presentation. I want to say thank you all so much. And we're going to open it up for questions in just a second. I'm going to give you a quick preview. In a couple weeks, we're going to be doing a presentation on how to leverage this data and move forward in your technology adoption process. We have 7 steps to drive successful industrial DevOps adoption, and we're going to dig deep into each and every one of those steps and provide some other outside references to make decisions. All right, so thank you, and we'll move into questions. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, that scanner will help you. That other scanner next to the State of Industrial DevOps report will allow you to download that and reach it. And we do have handouts available in the presentation as well, including the report.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Jerry. As mentioned, feel free to ask some questions. You can do that by using the question tab in your GoToWebinar panel. We do have some coming in, and we'll continue to answer those as they do continue to come in, so please keep submitting them. We do have a few, though. The first is that downtime cost seems high, and I doubt my business sees that kind of impact. What's the one takeaway if we're going to focus on one thing regarding downtime and the data in this report?
So I've heard that a lot. I was presenting at FabTech a couple weeks ago, and we talked about downtime numbers. And I thought it was high too, and that's why we did such deep research and comparison. Like I said earlier, I think more than anything, you're going to know the downtime cost for your business, and that downtime cost is painful, regardless of what your numbers come out at. And just doing the things to empower your people, like getting them at the center of things, building the processes that are going to help them, I think is the #1 thing to focus on here, so that you can minimize downtime. And also doing those postmortems when you do have a downtime incident, so that you can understand what was the core reason for downtime. Going back to the 5 whys or any other system that you commonly use to really dig deep and understand, because like those examples I gave earlier, if you have somebody on 3rd shift changing code, but nobody's aware of that, and then it breaks the machine, and you're experiencing downtime from that, figuring out how you can get more visibility into what exactly the core issue is, so that you can address that issue and not something that's on the surface and will happen again. I hope I answered it.
Great. Moving on, we have a system for managing industrial code, but it doesn't seem to be working. What advice can you give us to get stakeholder buy-in for a change, especially where they don't think one is needed?
So we'll cover a lot of that in the next survey, but really, if you look at the report, we have a bunch of different pages on that that'll help. And just pulling this slide up now, really understanding that people are moving forward with this. We as a company are seeing a lot of innovators, those first movers on board, huge organizations to small organizations, and just recognizing that assembling the right decision makers. I mentioned detractors earlier. While they can stymie progress, they can be the best champions because people know that they're curmudgeon-y and that they don't want something that's unfamiliar. If you can get some data together to show them the impact, leverage the data from this report, other reports that are referenced here, reports from industry analysts, other data that's out there, talk to peers that have adopted the technology you're looking at, build that case holistically so you can appeal to the person that is very data centric, appeal to the person that is very peer reference centric, and make sure that your team's diverse, because again, going back to what I said a minute ago about asking those 5 whys, Like, you want a diverse team together so that people can say, hey, I recognize that problem, we're having this problem, do those problems connect? That way, when you're trying to pull money together for the investment, you're not just one department, you're multiple departments that see the benefit of connecting everyone, unsiloing them, and addressing the core root of the problem.
Okay, that leads into the next question someone submitted is, how soon do you expect mainstream adoption of industrial DevOps?
Fast, it's moving fast. I think we'll continue to have this first mover and fast follower placement, which is probably 15–20% of the market. Once more people are seeing those benefits and hearing from those peers, we'll see a lot more. So looking at that Frost and Sullivan research, we've talked to a bunch of other industry analysts recently as well. It's taking hold quickly. And if we go back, I'll go back to that timeline, you can see how quickly DevOps took hold. And that's part of why we put this timeline together. So from first mention in 2008, 2009, there were books and reports being published 4 years. Then 3 years later, Gartner predicts mainstream adoption of DevOps. 4 years, Forrester calls this the year of DevOps. If we look at that timeline and carry it over, we're already 4 years into industrial DevOps. So within the next 5 years or less, with the speed of how technology investment is going, we're going to see pretty mainstream adoption. My prediction.
Great. And then the last question we have here, unless anyone wants to submit a last minute one, is how's industrial DevOps different than, say, lean manufacturing or agile?
It's the next evolution. And it's different, but looking at, I read a ton of books, and I was recently reading about lean production being introduced, The Machine That Changed the World, great book. And the struggle of mass production adopting lean methodologies and understanding how much different it was and what type of cultural change, what type of process change it brought in. I see industrial DevOps as a similar change and similarly impactful in the way that people work and the impact for the business. Hugely beneficial, hugely impactful, but also hugely important to get your people on board with the change and make that a core component of technology adoption. And that goes for any technology adoption, just making sure your people are bought in and informed on why you're doing it and how it will impact them in a positive way.
Great. I think that's all the questions we have, Jerry.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you again to everyone for joining. Really appreciated the questions, really appreciated sharing the data. Always happy to talk about data, so please reach out anytime. And a huge proponent of industrial DevOps as a whole. It's just fascinating and digging in to this timeline, this data, and how it's impacting the industry is very impactful. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.